Hello, and welcome to today's session. Today, we're going to be talking about email marketing, measuring success, and other tips. What we're going to spend most of our time on today is really how do we know if we're doing a good job at email? How do we look at the data to understand if we're achieving success, and what does that look like? We'll share some other tips. There's a lot of great content already out there on how to create great emails and how to use emails. So we'll share a couple of resources that we like, and we'll give a couple of our top tips. But we'll really spend more of the time on just that very thing, measuring success and understanding whether or not we're doing a good job. And Jeffrey, I always like personally to start with benchmarks, some industry data to look at, and there's some benchmarks here. And for me, I always like to have that as a starting point. You know, we start to look at our campaigns in regards to benchmarks. What do you think?
I think, again, they're good numbers. I think we just have to be cautious that benchmarks are washing a lot into that. You have your persona, you have your geography, you have your message, you have the quality of your list that you're sending out to. So there's a lot of variables that go into what these numbers should be. So if you can find standards on the internet that closely approximate sort of your audience, your message, everything like that, then I think it's great to have numbers that you can sort of say, hey, well, 17.8 is what my peers that look like me and are marketing to the same people that I'm marketing to. I like that. If we just take some of the broader, like if you go to sort of there's a Digital Marketing Association and Gartner and all these sort of global entities that are saying a manufacturing company to a IT services company to a shoe retail company, and they say, oh, the open rate's 17.8%. That's where it gets a little lost on me because there's such diversity in, again, the message, the persona, the audience, the intent. So there's a slew of things that I don't disagree with the numbers because the numbers are hopefully mathematically sound. But I think what is best is to baseline what you are doing. Just send an email out to your audience and get those numbers, and then try to beat those numbers, I guess would be my appropriate.
Yeah, and I think that's a sound approach as well. I mean, if you start with like, hey, what are we doing, and then how do we beat it? I like to be informed by both that and by some level of industry data. And you're right, like some of this, what does it mean to me if that's a cross industry rate? And this report, if you go through it, there's they break it down by industry, but even that the numbers don't change a lot. And I think part of that is, or at least in the industry, the tech industry, that where they broke it out, it was really about the same.
Yeah.
But I think some of these are sort of like, the unsubscribe rate is one, for example. If that's a benchmark, like, hey, we definitely want to be below that from an unsubscribe rate. But if we're above it, then what does that tell us? Like maybe we're early in our maturity on our data, and therefore we're going to have, and we haven't done a lot of email marketing, maybe we're going to have a little higher unsubscribe rate. And so we want to start driving it down below it. But we probably want to eventually beat this number substantially anyway, because it is a number. If it's high and you're doing regular email marketing, you're going to really have a churn in your audience if you're getting too much there. But some of these, I think also it's good to break down the intent behind your emails.
Mm-hmm.
If it's an awareness email that should hopefully have a higher open rate. If it's a sales email, maybe you have a lower open click-through rate because it's a harder offer, but those that click through should hopefully be better prospects for you.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a good point, maturity of it as well. Like if we just take in isolation the unsubscribe rate, if you just went out and bought a database today and you're in a country where you can do that, so you're not in Canada and some of the sort of the even states with the US, or if you look globally in some of the countries. So if you're able to do that and you just send that first email out, guess what? You want to have a high unsubscribe rate because you want to get that down via email. The way that you're sort of having people opt in to appreciating and seeing value in the message in your business is frankly through unsubscribe. You can say opens. In this day and age, opens are kind of a tough one because firewalls and these corporate email systems are sort of opening things before they go through to check for stuff. So open rate kind of doesn't mean as much as it used to, when it used to be literally that someone physically was opening it. So that's changing. Click-through is important because that means that a human took an action there. I'm even hearing of some technologies that are in an AI way, are clicking these links to make sure that they're not spam and sort of Trojan horses. So even there, we have to watch out for. But unsubscribe is an interesting one because I haven't heard yet of anything that automatically goes to an unsubscribe. Could be out there. So if someone here knows about that, again, you can comment here. I'd love to hear about that. But with that all being said, I think I guess it gets back to these numbers are going to be so many different things. I have one customer that right now they're trying to do a database purge. They have like 22,000 people in their database, and they know that their target audience isn't 22,000. So they're literally this week going to be sending out an email to say, hey, are you interested? Like, do you want, like, they're almost going to say, unsubscribe if you're not interested.
Right,
again,
right.
I know the intent there wouldn't be a surprise if a bunch of people unsubscribe, but I think it just shows that based on a lot of variables. So that's why if you roll this back to my prior statement, if you were just like, hey, it's 17.8, it's like, what, where, when, why? Is that mature? Is that your install base? Like if you're for unsubscribe, if you're going to your install base, theoretically you should have 0 unsubscribe. And where the elephant in the room we'll get to is the content good? So that's a whole different thing, but let's not go there yet. Let's just keep with the numbers. So I think it goes back to the standards. Again, I don't disagree that having a goal can't hurt, but I would say if your open rate was 9% and you're going to your install base and you have great content, should you stop everything else to try to get up to 17.8? I don't know. I think that's a tough one. Do I want to get higher than 9%? Absolutely, but I think it comes down to a lot of variables still.
Yeah, and I was thinking about this morning, and it's like, well, if we exceeded the click-through rate, we would never go to a customer and say, hey, this is awesome, we exceeded the benchmark click-through rate. Like, let's, we're going to now throw a party here on a happy Friday that we hit the click-through rate. But it does sort of give us a, hey, does this feel like it's performing well? And I think relative to other things we're doing, relative to who we're targeting, and relative to the benchmark, to me, it's a data point. People, in my opinion, often will use data very incorrectly. They'll sort of try to make big assumptions, like very binary, like, well, we exceeded this rate, therefore we're good or bad, or I want to justify that this email is good, and therefore I'm going to go pull this data point to say, oh, the email is good, it exceeded this benchmark, versus trying to analyze the email itself in terms of, hey, I sent this to a bunch of customers, and my unsubscribe rate, I had people unsubscribe. Like, what the heck? Like that doesn't feel very good, or whatever the metric may be, where we just need to analyze that email as its own unique entity.
Yeah, and again, you can't argue. Like I can't argue against your statement with regards to having a number and looking at it's a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's just how you interpret them. To your last point, it's like I can interpret those numbers any which way I want. So just be careful on that front.
Absolutely. So let's maybe jump into then email for lead generation, and I don't know if there are any tips that you have, Jeffrey, on how to, if our objective in a given email, and I know that some of these, like, we should really have dual objectives, so even breaking these out sometimes can be incorrect, and that if we're doing it right, all of our emails should be nurturing, but that some should have calls to action, that we are trying to generate some sales opportunities. So any tips that you have on that?
Yeah, and a lot of them are here, but to speak off the chart for a second, it goes back to knowing your audience, knowing what they're going to value from the beginning, because regardless of the numbers and opens and clicks and unsubscribes, we want to make sure that we have the best value being delivered to our intended audience. And the way you're going to give them the best value is to know what they value. So this still gets back to all the foundational items of, again, know your persona, have them written down, have them well thought out, and then be thoughtful about the content that you create for them, and that it's speaking to the human. It's not just selling your business and trying to say we're great. It's really giving something that they're going to value, because think of how many emails we get in a day. So you really do have to stand out. So if you have brand recognition, they're like, oh, I know that company, then it's going to increase the likelihood that they're even going to give your email a look. And again, I'll get away from the open concept, like I said before, where I think that number gets skewed a little bit with some of the sort of the IT security infrastructure stuff. But with that all being said, I think it really is coming up with great content. And then something we haven't talked about a lot in the series is knowing when the content is right and wrong. Like if you are segmenting your list, which is definitely something I'm sure you'll chat to, David, but if you are segmenting a list, know where the people are. Like if you have a list of folks that just like came to your website and whatever, subscribe for your blog or something that's sort of more top of funnel. They're not showing any intent to buy, and you email blast them with like buy today. Again, it's just not associated to where they are in their journey. Like they thought your company was cool and you said something smart, so they wanted to follow your blog, or they downloaded an infographic or something that's more sort of top middle of funnel. Don't bombard them with buy today demos and stuff like that. Just be respectful where they are and make sure you're offering value. And that's foundationally, we'll go to other things, but foundationally, that's where it starts, because everything from there, the imagery and subject line and everything is all predicated on those two things in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the subject line is really the first, winner, because people get a lot of email and all they're going to see is the name and the subject line. And so,
Yeah.
um, those variables, and we had, it's interesting, like part of it is just being very mindful that as we're doing this, that these things impact, you've got your copy, your call to action, your content, your subject line, and who it's from. So all these are kind of unique variables that we look at, and when we're doing ones. And we did an email recently to a fairly defined audience on our end, and we posted via social. We did an email from the company, and I did some very personalized emails to a small set of contacts. And the personalized emails to a small set of contacts created more result than the email blast to the audience that wasn't quite as warmed up. And so now we've got a bunch of variables. It's like, well, we use different subject lines, and there's the same sender but different subject lines. We had one audience that knew of us and one audience that probably didn't know as much about us. And the audience that knew about us in this case had a pretty good interest rate in it. Kind of a personalized email for me. We got people engaged in the content at a much higher rate than a more general email from me, but to an audience that didn't know us. So it's sometimes these things. It's like, well, so does the audience care about it, about this topic? And if they do, then why didn't they like? Maybe we made too strong of an offer. We gave them too much because they didn't know us. So it was a webinar offer. Maybe that was too much of an offer. Maybe we should have given them something lighter first to see if they fed into it.
Yeah, and also as you were talking, I was thinking, it also comes down to, like, we talk about CTA because your subject line, hopefully in the whatever tool they're using, if they're using Google, if they're using Outlook, whatever email application they're using, they're going to just see, as you said, name line, name line, name line from the subject line standpoint. So you definitely want to stand out there. But then once you get into it, and A/B testing is huge, and I want to spend time on that in a few minutes, but also that we I was just thinking, we call it the call to action. And again, the action is always serving us. It's serving the
Yep.
sender. Oh my, here today I start a new initiative of, like, it should be like a call to value, or like a link to value.
Right.
There it is, link to value, LTV. Everyone put that in Wikipedia. I'm the author. But it comes down to, like, we want, like, even if we had that mind shift, and again, I'm big on sort of humanizing and knowing your customer and really offering value to them, because you will get great results over time. And I think that's like, it's like linking to value versus a call to action. Because to your point, a call to action is like, we want you to watch this webinar so we can capture information, or we want you to watch our demo. We want you to fill out this form. We. And again, all great. We're here to create demand to grow our business. But just spin that around to say, hey, we're going to link you to value, this content piece, this research finding, this webinar. And again, you still have your forum, but just that change in mindset, I think, will pay off, because I look at emails every single day that I get them. And again, the ones that stand out, to your point, David, are more personal, even
Mhm.
though I know the personalization is being done by marketing on, like, no human sat there and wrote this message just to me, but still they knew who I was. They put my name in there. They knew the company name. They knew sort of my role or title or something along those lines. So it's like, hey, for folks in operations that, work at marketing companies, like GSL marketing, like, I appreciate the approach, but also it's, hey, and here's what I want you to do versus here's what I think you'll find value in doing. Like, guys, little nuance, but big, I think.
Well, let's talk about personalization here for a second, because there's sort of the personalization, the sort of auto personalization that we can accomplish through marketing automation, where we may reference some bit of data that we have, whether it's their name or their company. And I think that's helpful. But I think more of that personalization, where you're taking, where you have a salesperson effectively taking the email and taking an email template and adding more than just a word, maybe adding a couple of sentences
Mhm.
to it, referencing how this may be applicable to what they're doing. So, hey, Mr. Prospect or Ms. Prospect, we spoke, a few months ago about how you had a need for ABC solution. We've got this great article that just came out on ABC, an ABC case study. Hope you like it. If there's anything I can do to help, click here to schedule a meeting with me. Like
Yeah.
just something like that. That becomes like, okay, will you acknowledge me individually? But the sort of structure of the email, a lot of that is a template. But the salesperson has to go in there and think, okay, well, why is this going to be valuable to this individual? And that becomes a much faster thing for the sales rep to do. So it saves them a lot of time, but it comes to the prospect very, very personalized, because it is, versus
Mhm.
just, hi, insert name, Bob or Mary, content, offer, etc.
And where do you think you use it? Because you say it's smaller segments. Like my customer, they can't do that 22,000 times over. It's just not enough salespeople, enough time in the day. So how would you start to splice up? How would you prioritize the
Well,
X% that you should do that on? Because it can't be
well,
100%, of course.
well, so that's where I think the segmentation needs to go in. Of like, we've got we've got our larger set of prospects that marketing should be sending the emails to, and then we've got a smaller set of longer term prospects of people that may have been engaged that really the salespeople should be involved in this nurturing. And this is going to be a big challenge for many marketers, right? Because the salespeople are focused on this quarter. But if you're not building awareness and you're not building a relationship, you're not going to get the sales. You're not going to get the prospects interested down the road, because they don't know who you are, and you're always going to be in an uphill battle to bring on new customers. So you have to invest in building a relationship. And in the past, we did it through ball games and steak dinners and other events. And now it has to be really through content, through engagement over a longer period of time and offering value. I can't tell you how many of the emails I personally get, and it's all like, "Hey, would you like to buy something for me today?" I'm like, "I don't know who you are. Like, I've never talked to you. I don't have any reason to talk to you, even if I'm interested in your solution. But if you wanted to send me content and offer me things of value, I'll read it or at least scan it, and then I'll start to kind of get to know who your company is, and then maybe I'll be interested in talking to you down the road." And even companies that engage where I'll talk to them and I'm interested, but I'm not buying today. 9 times out of 10, the sales rep never sends anything again. Or if it is, it's a year later and it's like, okay, are you buying now? Like, well, we don't have any relationship. We talked a year ago and you've never sent me anything
Yeah.
until then. And so that's where I see the value, and marketing can provide that content. I mean, marketing can provide the foundation, especially if you're using great tools like HubSpot or others that
Mhm.
allow for that, that sequence customization, the sort of personalization within templates. Now you've got to be careful, because a lot of times people can take very generic content and just put it on blast, and that's going to be far worse than than not sending anything at all.
And I think that's something that's coming up as a theme here is choose how you want to use email. And again, it's probably going to be situational, but is email used as a strategy within your business to just, blast as many people to get your name in front of them, just brand
Right.
recognition? Again, I'm not saying right or wrong, I'm just saying there's an option. And then the opposite side of the scale is sort of, again, you're close to the opposite side of the scale where it's almost sort of like, handwritten sort of letters. And again, I know you're saying
Yep.
it's semi, so again, yours slightly to the left
Yep.
of that, but
Yep.
handwritten letters, again, which is wonderful. Relations show you care. It's thoughtful. Like there's a lot of positive brand things that come from that. And to your point, relationship building. I think that's very important. Like the folks that watch this, I think that's what you have to consider. Like, what is email to you? Is it just this
Yep.
mass communication channel for you? Is it just to get you newsletters out and sort of updates about your business? Is it to allow for sort of the semi customized things, or is it highly customized? And the answer is it
Yep.
should be all of those, right?
Exactly. It
Yeah.
should be all of them. And I think part of it is sort of learning, like, for your audience, where does that combination lie? And so in the example I gave, the webinar offer to people that knew me, that came from me about this, that had some level of personalization, performed well.
Yeah.
That same offer to the same audience, also from me, so the sender's the same. It's just always good to kind of understand where our variables are, right? That didn't perform well. And it was to an audience that didn't know us as well. And so the biggest variable between the two were sort of the level of personalization in the note and the fact that the audience didn't know us. And frankly, the two are sort of, you know, similar. So we could test like, hey, what if I sent a generic email to the same audience? Would it perform to the warm audience? Would it perform well? I don't know. Maybe it would, but I wouldn't want to send a generic email to people that I know, because that feels sort of like cheap to me. It's like, hey, I know you. Like, don't send me
Yeah.
some templated email. So I think it is trying to understand that entire mix and where to use like the mass email, and how do you get your sales team to invest a little bit of time on long-term prospecting. And if it's not your field sales, maybe it's your inside sales.
Hmm.
But if we're ignoring nurturing, that kind of personalized nurturing
Hmm.
from the reps, you're always going to be in this case where you're getting into a sales cycle of people that may or may not be terribly aware of you, or at the very least, the rep doesn't have a relationship with you, which is very important.
And I think there's 2 points. I want to talk about A/B testing because you just kind of hinted at, and I think it would be, cool for us to share some thoughts or our opinions. But also back to that, like, know that every touch point with your customer is to establish brand, trust, authority, and personal relationships, as you were talking about, David. But let's just take it away from the salesperson, like representing the brand. And I sometimes feel like we forget that. We think branding would be website, maybe some
Yeah,
advertising, but every phone conversation that your sales team or service team or consultants, I don't care, anyone in the organization that's having a touch point with the customer, that's a brand impression moment, just like these emails are. And I'm not talking about just having the logo in there. So it's like, oh, I see the logo and it's this color. I'm really talking like that. These are like, they should be considered as not throwaways. Like it shouldn't,
yeah,
like, even with the 22,000 mass email, like, be conscious that's your brand. And to your point, if you just throw something out there that's very generic, doesn't offer me any value, I'm judging your brand at that point. I might not
absolutely.
open or click through the email, but worse, I'm like, TSL, they don't
That's
care about
exactly
me.
it.
They don't understand me. So I haven't said that to a lot of customers, but it's really important. So I think is really important.
Yeah, and so I'm going to jump to going through some like metrics we can kind of look at. I do want to reference, as I mentioned, there's a lot of good stuff out there just on email best practice. A nice guide here by HubSpot, and then Campaign Monitor has a good guide on understanding email regulations. So we're not gonna cover that today, but certainly recommend you understand that for the markets you support. But this, Jeffrey, I think just a couple of charts here. I wanted to start on the bottom on an A/B test, and you know this is an actual test we did where the manager created that we work on one of our teams created an email, and I'm like, I don't like the subject line, use this one. And he's like, no, I don't like your subject line, like let's use mine. I'm like, I don't know. And then he said, okay, why don't we A/B test it? I'm like, "Oh, okay. Like it felt like okay, like came on, but it's good from a learning perspective. And it came back with the test here, and I was like, both of these are bad. But are they? Are they bad? Yeah, I think so. This is an audience that we knew a lot about, but we hadn't been really doing any emails. It was our first email, and we didn't really have a good, they had no knowledge of the brand, and the content we kind of had to drive them to some generic content, long story, and so it performed okay. Now the good thing about this, because we knew so much about the audience, the people that did open it and click through, like we found that to be really like, oh, okay, this is a really good indicator that they care about the offering. Probably because everything else is so bad and so generic that if they did open and click through, they have to be interested. So there is that kind of converse thing. But to have like a couple of tests, and here you might say, well, this version B did slightly better, but the numbers are close enough that it's not too meaningful. And then up here, these are just some examples, and you can see like in different volumes. Sometimes when we get smaller volumes, like you have a more targeted message and it can perform better, but not always. You see down here, this is actually the one I was referring to, kind of that larger audience with the same content. It performed really badly. And of course, we're going to look at that unsubscribe rate. And all these are below benchmark, but none of these are ones that I feel great about, except the one right here. And so it's kind of interesting. Sometimes that sort of the lower the click-through rate, the higher the unsubscribe rate. Sometimes, not always the case, but they do sort of go hand in hand sometimes. That you start to see that number go higher. And again, this is a larger audience, and it's probably a newer audience because it's not as segmented, and so it's not something that necessarily feels terrible to us. But it would say just kind of constructively, as we're looking at different emails, we can see sort of how these numbers vary widely, and then let's try to learn as much as we can from each one of these.
Yeah, there's a lot of points to bring up here, but I think one was like it's that like I think this goes back to reinforce like figure out what your baselines are. Again, I'm not saying we should ignore industry, but figure out yours. Like if we take this small sample here, so what's it, 0.54, 0.6, you know, 0.2. So I don't know, the average here is probably, you know, 0.58 or something like that. Maybe it's that 0.29. So it's like there's your unsubscribe rate is somewhere around whatever, 0.58, 0.59, whatever it is there. Use that. And if the industry is saying it should be 0.001, guess what? And this gets back. Your reality with your content into your audiences and your list is 0.59 right now. So try to beat that. Again, you can use the 0.001 as the end goal, but try to beat that. And to your even the better point that you bring up, like figure out why. Like,
Yeah.
oh, for that one that we did on whatever the 28th there, where we had 692, like that's an audience that we knew that you know, subscribe to our newsletter. Let's say that's our blog subscription list, something like that, an action. And that's yet another reason where you can't just say email is, you know, it should be point whatever the open rate is, because there's an audience that theoretically, and again, I don't know what that was, but theoretically, if that was somebody that subscribed to our list, or it's like our customer installs, or it's like you have a, you know, a committee of customers or something that you use
Yep.
for like, you know, then you should have a 0% click-through rate. Like you shouldn't accept anything over zero. So I guess that's more into it. And in the A/B testing, we haven't put it. We have other seminars to talk more about that, but that's really important. Don't go changing everything. Like change things, like you said, David. Like where you had it was from you subject line, or it's from you change the subject line. Like don't send it from a different person with different subject line and a different graphic compared to another one where it's different
Yeah.
sender, different subject line, different graphic, because you don't know what, like one performs better. You're like, well, what performed better? You have to almost then go back and, well, okay, well, let's put David's name in with that subject line and that graphic. So
Yeah.
make iterative changes is what I'll say there.
Yeah. And the great thing is like it's easy to do. There are great tools that can allow you to do really easy A/B testing, and so there's no reason not to.
Yeah.
And maybe like in this case, in a lot of these, like the team isn't necessarily sending different versions out because we feel like we've got a pretty good idea of what the right version and message is, but you can see a pretty wide range of interest in the offer for different emails. So
Yeah.
trying to understand the why behind it is always the most important and the hardest part as well.
So to close this one out, I'm right. You should look at your averages and try to improve. You should look at industry standards, right, David?
Absolutely wrong, Jeffrey. But I think a little bit of that. I think a little like for me, it's both. Like
Yeah.
I agree. I think looking at your benchmark and figuring out how to improve, but also looking at the benchmark
Yeah.
is important. So you guys can decide for yourselves what you think is the right
Let us
approach.
know. Let
Yeah,
us
let
know.
us.
Comment on this. Like the great debate between Dave and Jeff. I'd love to know which one of us is right.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for listening, and as always, feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or suggestions or anything we can do to help. All right, thanks.